Okay, today I would like to go back to our friend Sirach, Ecclesiasticus. But before that, I just want to give you a little historical locating of this material. We've read enough of Sirach now for you to kind of sense the flavor of the thing. There's no heroics in it at all. This is very kind of humdrum moralizing, you might say. You know, what the used to be called bourgeois ethics. The big issues are, family controversy and cheating in small business ventures and things like that. There's no sense of any kind of national or international crises or opportunities. And the virtues that are called for are all virtues of, keeping in control of what you're supposed to control, including yourself, and kind of being nice but not too nice, and making friends but not too many, and so on. A very conservative, domestic kind of morality. So it doesn't look like a book that was done in circumstances of any great turbulence, any great challenges, any great invitations to make Israel great again, or anything like that. Now, when would that be? The only clue we get in the book of Sirach is in the, I guess, the 45th chapter. You don't need to read it if you want. It begins, he calls, "Let us now praise famous men," which became also a title of a famous book of photographs in the 20th century. And there we get a little breakdown of Sirach's heroes from the past. They're the usual suspects. But Abraham, Moses, David, etc. And then, interesting to note, Solomon here. Solomon reigned in an age of peace because God made all his borders tranquil, so that he might build a house in his name and provide a sanctuary to stand forever. But, 19, you brought in women to lie at your side, and through your body you were brought into subjection. So Solomon's dealings with foreign women come into the picture.
Oh God, those foreign women.
Oh, those foreign women. We still got them, Then on through Rehoboam and so on. Josiah, as I say, the ones you'd expect. But, okay. In chapter 50, the leader of his brothers and the pride of his people was the high priest Simon, son of Onias, who may not ring any kind of bell with anyone, but he gets more space here than anybody else. And he's the last, chronologically, who shows up. Now, and that gives us some idea of when this book came about. Onias was probably right there then, and that would bring it down to the early part of the 2nd century. Now, if so, this would have been a time of calm just before an awful storm, but, very calm. Things were kind of okay. So I just want to go back and give you some historical setting for this. The Bible leaves us a big historical blank of almost 300 years. From the time when Ezra and Nehemiah were doing their stuff, rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the walls, and promulgating the law, all the way through the rest of the Persian Empire's control, and into the Greek, Alexandrian Hellenistic control. All of that there's nothing in the Bible about except indications that it happened, but nothing about it. So for that period, the only information we have is from Greek sources and from Josephus, the Jewish historian, and that's what we have to rely on, and it seems to be pretty reliable for the most part. Now, just to kind of put you into the picture, Ezra and Nehemiah have done their stuff around 445. That's when their law is promulgated, and that's the last we hear from the Bible for quite a while. The next thing that the Bible takes up is 175 in Maccabees, 1 Maccabees. 175. So from 445 to 175, there's a biblical blank of information. Now, what is actually going on during that time? Very important things. The conquest of the Persians by the Greeks. So the Alexander the Great took over that whole part of the world, including Palestine, and thereby replaced the rule of the Jews with Greek rule. Alexander did that and took no particular interest in Palestine or that territory because he had much bigger things in mind. And then Alexander died in 332 or 23. 23, 323, Alexander died. And nothing much had been done about the succession. So the succession was determined by conflicts and deal-making among his leading generals. And that led to the development of two groups, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. Both named from places or people in their own families. They were generals, and they generated their own succession. Now, so that takes place right after Alexander dies. The Ptolemies get Egypt, and a little while later, they get Palestine. There's some resistance to the getting of Palestine, but it's, we don't need to go into all of that. The Seleucids get Babylonia, the whole thing. And Cilicia, Cyrenaica, which is essentially North Africa. The Ptolemies are from the start fairly modest and gentle rulers, and the Seleucids are from the start rather rough rulers and very expansionist. The Seleucids have all that, and they want a lot more. So they begin expanding in everywhere they can, which brings them up to the edge of Palestine, where the Ptolemies are lodged. Now, how much of this to bother with here? Palestine was ruled by the Ptolemies. Palestine till 198. The Seleucids ruled Palestine from 198. From 198 until the Maccabean Revolt and the ultimate success of the Maccabean Revolt, making Israel once again an independent nation for a relatively short time. During this period, when the Ptolemies and the Seleucids seem to be the main historical characters, Rome is developing very, very vigorously, and will eventually take over everything. But they're kind of unnoticed by the Seleucids and the Ptolemies until it's too late. Just a few things about the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. They were originally, the original Ptolemies and Seleucids were colleagues, co-fighters and friends, but once they got their separate territories, they became rivals and in many respects enemies. The big attempt to make them friends again is an interesting story in itself. It doesn't have too much to do with what we're doing. But Antiochus the First, Seleucids are always named either Seleucus the something or Antiochus the something.
And they're Ptolemies.
Hmm?
And they're Ptolemies, all of them. And the Ptolemies are all Ptolemies.
Ptolemies are all Ptolemies.
Yeah. They weren't very clever with their names.
They what?
They gave the kids all the same names.
Yeah, you're right. Which makes it very difficult to remember anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get down to like 9, and Ptolemy the Ninth, things like that.
Well, sometimes they did stick another name on the end of it.
Oh, usually an honorific name,
Yeah.
like the Conqueror, or the Brave, or the Wise, or something like that.
Or the Fat.
Or the one who conquered such and such a place. Yeah, the Romans did that too, Scipio Africanus, he conquered Africa. So if you see a Seleucus the something, or an Antiochus the something, you know they're Seleucids. And these, as you said, are always Ptolemies. Now, Antiochus the First, in 280, we don't really need the date, made the first and most famous attempt to reunite the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And he did it in the old-fashioned way, by marriage. He was married. He was married to a lady named Laodice, and they had a kid. And he decided that if instead he married Berenice or Berenice from a Ptolemaic royal family, he could bring them together, and the obstacle was, of course, Laodice. So after giving it a few minutes' thought, he repudiated Laodice and her son, divorced them, rejected them totally, and married Berenice, and had a son by her. Laodice was still alive and was not at all happy about this. Antiochus I died in 257. Laodice was still in the best of health, and she then proceeded to ask for a bid to assassinate Berenice and her son. And the bid was quickly taken by local assassins, and Berenice and her kid were slain, which enabled Laodice to put her son on the throne, which she proceeded to do. So the attempt to reunite through marriage was a disastrous failure. The one she put on the throne was her...
How do you spell that?
Allowed all these people, okay. The Berenice is spelled in the usual way.
Yeah.
Laodice. Laodice. Okay. Antiochus I seems to have been a pretty decent ruler, and rather peace inclined, and that's what led him to do this, but it was a very bad choice and kind of disastrous. Now, the son of Laodice had a son in turn. Her son was called Seleucus II. Remember, they're all Seleucuses or Antiochuses. And he had a son. He had several sons. The first one was king for a short time and died young. And he was succeeded by Antiochus III. This is Antiochus the Great. Antiochus the Great had a son, Antiochus IV, and Antiochus IV is the great horror figure in all of Jewish history. He's not only a horror figure in the historical setting, but he becomes even kind of mythologically a horror figure. He's the ghastly presence behind even the Christian book of Revelation, the abomination of desolations and all of that. So he becomes a symbol of everything awful that can possibly happen to Israel. So the book of Sirach, Ecclesiasticus, clearly was not written during that time. That was a time when everybody was very worried and very involved, or trying hard not to be involved in the struggles that were coming about. The transfer of control of Palestine from the Ptolemies to the Seleucids in 198 was not disastrous at all. Rule continued to be pretty tranquil, and everybody got along okay. After Antiochus IV came in, it was entirely different. But there was already a great deal of tension, and none of it shows up in Sirach, between the Hellenists and the anti-Hellenist Jews. Those who wanted to go Greek and those who wanted to keep tradition. Now the ones who wanted to Hellenize Judaism wanted to go very, very far with this. They wanted to Hellenize everything. Forget about Hebrew and use Greek. Use Greek practices. Tolerate Greek gods. I mean, it was still the same old god, but if you want to have a Greek god around the edges, that's okay. And adopt Greek practices, study in Greek schools, study the Greek philosophers rather than the prophets and so on. And of course there's the issue of the gymnasium, which was the place for the Hellenistic aristocracy to go. And they got one built in Jerusalem, and young Jews wanted to go there too, and that led to great tension within families. So that's all brewing, and the difference between the Hellenizers and the anti-Hellenizers is very, very great. I mean, the Hellenizers were really looking for a revolution in religion. They want to almost change it into something else. Still with the same God and so on, but everything else really changed. And the anti-Hellenizers became more and more upset, and relations between them became not only hostile, but frequently violent, and also led to all kinds of political ties, where conservatives tried to find conveniently conservative political leaders, and the Hellenizers tried to find Hellenistic political leaders. Down through Antiochus III, the government, the Hellenistic government, was pretty neutral in all of this. Mm-hmm. They all felt they had a mission to provide Greek culture, but not to, kind of ram it down your throat. It was there. They thought it would speak for itself, that it was superior in many ways to any of the countries they were occupying, and they were right. Greek culture among Jews thrived particularly under Ptolemaic rule in Egypt. And during the Ptolemaic rule, the Jewish communities all through Egypt, all along the Nile, but particularly around Cairo, developed prosperity, developed numerically, developed culturally, did just fine. And it was out of that that the Hellenistic influence produced the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Bible. The Greek version of the Bible was put forward by the Hellenists as an improvement on the Hebrew Bible, because Greek was better than Hebrew. You could say things more subtly in it than you could in Hebrew. And this also led to kind of theological supporting theses, whereby the Septuagint was directly inspired by God. Not just the Hebrew was and so on, but the Septuagint writers, translators, were directly inspired by God, who occasionally took the opportunity, now that he had smart secretaries instead of dumb secretaries, to fix up some of the weaknesses in the Hebrew Bible. Now this did have a great worldwide effect, because if you have the Bible in Greek, then all cultured people everywhere in the Western world could read it. And there was a great deal of interest in foreign religions all through the Greek Hellenistic Empire and subsequently the Roman Empire, and they did read it. So in that sense, it led to the globalization of the Bible. The Jews of Egypt clearly were very comfortably off. They had nice tombs, like both the Egyptians did. We find a lot of records of banking, which indicates that they had quite a bit of money and so on. Under the Ptolemies in Egypt, Judaism thrived. Under the Ptolemies in Palestine, Judaism thrived, but not as much, because there wasn't as much to thrive with in Palestine. I mean, Egypt was a much richer place. And under the Seleucids, when they took over, they continued to thrive until Antiochus IV came in. So once again, going back to Sirach, you can see when Sirach must have been, in what circumstances Sirach was written, in the circumstances of, relative peace and prosperity brought in well before Antiochus IV Epiphanes. As you read the book of Sirach, you find that there's a great preoccupation with authority in the family and all the bad things that women may lead to and all the good things that men may lead to. And a lot of that kind of family morality as they understood it then. Keep your kids in order. Daughters are a big problem. Boys are fine if you beat them enough, and so on. At the same time, you find a considerable preoccupation with loans, sureties, guarantees, and so on, which you wouldn't have unless there was money around. I mean, if there are loans, somebody's loaning something, and there must be something to loan. So the preoccupation with that indicates that there was a lot of business going on, and that the business has already been managed in ways that left some people very disadvantaged and some very advantaged, because again, in the book of Sirach, you find great preoccupation with the plight of the poor and the readiness of the rich to exploit their misery for their own advantage. So it sounds as though the kind of overall it was a prosperous land, but as in our own land, the prosperity was very diversely distributed. They were very poor and they were very rich. There's very little interest in the book of Sirach in the temple. I mean, the temple is praised. It's certainly a perfectly orthodox view of the temple, but no big fuss about it, as there would have been, say, back in the time of Nehemiah. Not much really even about religion except in the sense of God is managing everything, and if you behave yourself, God will take care of you. Now that view is very strong in Sirach. The idea that, well, first of all, there's no question at all about individual responsibility. Each person is responsible for the moral quality of his or her behavior. That had been controversial, because you remember back in the time of the 8th century prophets, we seem to have God made responsible for people doing pretty nasty things. That's not here at all. So in that sense, it's a very modern, each person's conscience is his own guide. The death is discussed a lot, but never speculatively. There's no question about what death means. It means oblivion. It's the end of the line. You go into the underworld, and the underworld is the nearest you can come to nothing. What does that mean? First of all, if God is going to reward you, and you're going to be all that dead, how does God reward you? He rewards you by making your life comfortable and by seeing to the comfort and prosperity of your descendants and seeing to it that you have descendants. The progeny and wealth were always the measures of divine favor. Now, several sections of the book of Sirach also deal with doctors, physicians, again suggesting, a culture in which there were medical facilities that you could go to. He even talks about home remedies. You try these home remedies. If they don't work, there's always a doctor, and maybe he'll be able to fix you up. So you get the picture of the kind of society that they had, a very recognizable society, I think, by our own familiar standards. Curiously, although Sirach talks about, misery and suffering and the obligation for hard work and so on, his basic recommendation is the same as the basic recommendation of Koheleth, that very, very kind of cynical book. It's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. But eat in moderation, drink in moderation, be merry in moderation, and tomorrow you'll die and God will bless your children. So very much an idea of, this is it. This life is what you got. And what you do with it should be, morally creditable, but it should also be fun. So not even a hint of any kind of afterlife. And yet very soon afterward we will find references to an afterlife, a real afterlife, resurrection and so on. Okay, so do you see the picture of the time, the kind of setting, and the kind of moralizing, that kind of wisdom that Sirach is offering?
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Why do you think the Jews didn't put Sirach in their scripture? I mean, it seems like it's so Jewish.
Yeah, it's very Jewish. It's not very, certainly not very theological. There's not, as I say, minimum reference to the law, minimum reference to the temple. There is reference to the law, to the temple, and very respectful reference. I don't know, it's late. They favored earlier books. And we don't know how long they had a Hebrew text of it. Did they have a Hebrew text of it when they were actually doing the canonical thing in the 1st century of the Common Era? They may not have, in which case its being only in Greek would disqualify it. That was also what the Christian churches went by. It wasn't in Hebrew, so it wasn't the real thing. But now we have most of it in Hebrew after all that. So you'd have to know things we don't know to answer that question with any confidence. But I think it's quite possible that It was a Greek book then, when they were doing the Canada, and therefore it was sidelined, and not treated with disrespect, but not regarded as canonical.
It's not included in the Protestant Bible either?
No, no. It is in the Greek Orthodox, the Orthodox churches, but they speak Greek. The Greeker, the better.
Greek.
Okay, so that gives some sense of why it's the kind of book it is, and what kind of social setting it fits into, and so on. So let's take a few other samples of it. These will be somewhat random. In 11:19, you see a reference to what the reflection what I just said. When he says, I have found rest, and now I shall feast on my goods, he does not know how long it will be until he leaves them to others and dies. So you find a frequent motif that would remind you of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, you know, the parable of the guy who keeps building new storage bins because he's getting richer and richer and richer, and you know, after storage bin 10 he dies, and you know, so well, who is going to get all this stuff? That's very present here. You know, you only get a little life, so you're going to spend that life accumulating. What kind of a life is that? A life of accumulating something you'll never get much of anything out of. You know, there's a fair amount of psychological research going on right now about the accumulation compulsion, which is very prominent in our society. Just get more and more and more. You know, do you have enough? What's enough? You know, there are indications that this is kind of a compulsion, and you know, with all that goes with that psychologically.
Well, and Jesus gives a different twist to it when he says to store up treasure in heaven,
Yes,
which
yes.
suggests strongly an afterlife.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, well, with Jesus you have the resurrection and the afterlife, so that's no longer a problem.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Yeah. Why do you think, in your opinion, why do you think the Catholic Church decided this was so important, that just to include this stuff? Why do you think they thought it was so important?
Why did they include? Well, they included a bunch of other things too, of course,
Yes,
which we've already seen. They liked wisdom literature. Remember, the Catholic Church was very Romanized and Greekized, and that would make them favor. It was the kind of thing that they tended to like. The Greek-Hebrew issue was not a big issue. They didn't see any reason why Greek wasn't just as good as Hebrew. They thought it was better. I mean, quite early. We're talking about the 4th century when they made the canon. It was disputed. It was debated, but they decided that the content was appropriate, and that's basically it. It was a sound, moralizing book that reflected the tradition. There was nothing to object to in it. People had read it in the temple, had read it in the synagogues, had read it in the churches. So let's go. There was a tendency in the canonizing of these books to err rather on the side of inclusion than exclusion. You know, if it seems like maybe it belongs, let's keep it. Now, it was with the Protestant Reformation that it went, and that was because there was such emphasis on the Hebrew text. I mean, for Luther, the Hebrew text was it, and if this was not part of the Hebrew text, then it must go. And again, the Hebrew text wasn't known until the last century, so he wouldn't know anything about that.
What were the Gospels written in?
The Greek.
Oh, okay. But Jesus and his gang spoke Aramaic, didn't they?
Presumably, yeah, they certainly did. Whether they knew a little Greek, who knows? It would be, businessmen tended to know a little Greek if they were doing trans-Mediterranean trade. But you could do everything in the Middle East in Aramaic. There wasn't much Hebrew around. That's another thing that comes in during this period. Hebrew is vanishing. Who needs it? We've got Aramaic for a kind of business purposes, and we have Greek for cultural purposes. Why Hebrew? And that becomes a complaint too. You see it in Josephus a lot. Hebrew is vanishing, and Josephus did not write in Hebrew.
Wow.
A lot of things about friends. Again, it gives the idea of a society in which, kind of family and close friends were it. They were what mattered. And therefore you're told to be friendly, but don't make a lot of friends. Because if you have a lot of friends, you don't really know what they are and whether they're likely to let you down and so on. So good friends only. In chapter 7, again, it's kind of typical of the time, do not seek from the Lord high office or the seat of honor from the king. 6, do not seek to become a judge. So political ambition is not encouraged at all. In verse 10, do not grow weary when you pray, do not neglect to give alms, do not ridicule a person who is embittered in spirit. So once again, do not grow weary when you pray, but that's all they say about it. No great development about prayer or temple worship or anything of the kind. Do not exchange a friend for money, or a real brother for gold of Ophir. This is 18 of 7. Do not dismiss a wise and good wife, for her charm is worth more than gold. Do not abuse slaves who work faithfully, or hired laborers who devote themselves to their task. Let your soul love intelligent slaves. Do not withhold from them their freedom. So, something positive there. Do you have cattle? Look after them. It's kind of on a par, Treat your slaves right and they'll do the job. Treat your cattle right and they'll do the job.
I love the next one.
The children?
Yeah.
Do you have children? Discipline them. Make them obedient from their youth. Do you have daughters? Be concerned for their chastity. And do not show yourself too indulgent with them. Give a daughter in marriage and you complete a great task. But give her to a sensible man. Do you have a wife who pleases you? Do not divorce her, but do not trust yourself to one whom you detest. So it's totally, androcentric. Verse 8, do not contend with the powerful, or you may fall into their hands. So it's kind of keep a distance from, the shakers and movers. And that's just sort of courtesy things. 3, do not argue with the loud of mouth. 4, do not make fun of one who is ill-bred. 6, do not disdain one who is old. 8, do not slight the discourse of the sages. 9, do not ignore the discourse of the aged. 11, do not let the insolent bring you to your feet. 12, do not lend to one who is stronger than you, but if you do lend anything, count it as a loss.
Because you won't get it back.
It's really nice.
13, do not give surety beyond your means, but if you give surety, be prepared to pay. In other words, if you give a guarantee for somebody else, you know, he wants to take out a loan, he has nothing to put up for security. I say, I'm your buddy, I'll be glad to put something up. Put it up, but you're not going to get it. Forget it. So in general, it discourages guaranteeing other people loans.
Be wise enough to do it once. Be wise.
Do not look intently at a virgin. Do not dally with a singing girl. Do not go near a loose woman. Turn away your eyes from shapely women. What would happen in the entertainment industry?
I've got one. Be not intimate with a strange woman, lest you fall into her snare.
Yes. Yeah, that's strange means strange, you know, it's not a foreign woman. It's someone who's not like us. There's so much of that here. I mean, it is like us is the way to be. Like them is the way not to be. Whoever them may be. Great emphasis on holding your temper, being polite, not rocking the boat. You know, for its own place, you know, good advice. I mean.
Oh, I like this one. Discard not an old friend, for the new one cannot equal him.
Right. Yeah, and there you do see that old is better, tried and true. In 10:9, how can dust and ashes be proud? Even in life the human body decays. A long illness baffles the physician. The king of today will die tomorrow. So, you know, we're dying all our life long. The idea, and so what? Therefore do not be proud. Do not invite everyone into your home, for many are the tricks of the crafty. Like a decoy partridge in a cage, so is the mind of the proud. And like the spies, they observe your weakness, for they lie in wait, turning good into evil. So there again, you know, don't even let dubious people into your home, because who knows what they may be up to. And the place will be bugged. Your wires will be tapped.
Even your television.
And that, by the way, is very atypical, generally, of the Middle Eastern way of life. I mean, even now, homes are kind of open. They're very, hospitality is so much, you know, fundamental to Middle Eastern morality. So caution runs through all of this. Don't take chances. Don't talk to strangers. You can see some of Jesus' parables reflecting some of these things. This is 13:9. When an influential person invites you, be reserved, and he will invite you more insistently. Do not be forward, or you may be rebutted. Remember Jesus saying, don't take the first place.
First shall be last, and last
Yes.
shall be first.
The rich person speaks and all are silent. They extol to the clouds what he says. The poor person speaks and they say, who is this fellow?
And it's interesting.
There's a lot of kind of shrewd
modern
observation.
to today. Can you believe it? This is impressive.
Riches are inappropriate for a small-minded person, and of what use is wealth to a miser? When he denies himself, he collects for others, and others will live in luxury on his goods. So that's
Yeah.
the anti-accumulating thing. And yet the basic norm is 16, 14, 16, give and take and indulge yourself, because in Hades one cannot look for luxury. So this is what you got, make the most of it. Wine and women lead intelligent men astray.
Oh dear.
The man who consorts with prostitutes is reckless. There's no point at all in which the perspective of a woman is taken, nowhere in the book. Here again, you find a kind of common sense social morality. Question a friend, perhaps he did not do it. So this is, don't jump to conclusions about mischief. Or if he did, so that he may not do it again. Question a neighbor, perhaps he did not say it. Or if he said it, so that he may not repeat it. Question a friend, for often it is slander. So do not believe everything you hear. A person may make a slip without intending it. Who has not sinned with the tongue? So don't jump to conclusions, look for evidence, and even if there has been fault, talk about it. Don't just let it smolder. A person is known by his appearance. A sensible person is known. When first met face to face, a person's attire and haughty laughter and the way he walks show what he is. Haughty laughter is bad. This simile comes back, this metaphor comes back repeatedly. 24, it's kind of interesting. Like a eunuch lusting to violate a girl is the person who does right under compulsion. Now that image of the eunuch wanting sex appears at least 3 times in the book. And, therefore he was kind of going around. It was a simile that was used. Gain the trust of your neighbor in his poverty, so that you may rejoice with him in his prosperity. Stand by him in time of distress, so that you may share with him in his inheritance. So I'd say in general, Sirach seems like somebody you would not mind having move in next door. I mean, a very decent sort of guy, but don't expect any heroics. He's not going to join any dangerous causes or anything like that.
He sounds like Judge Hardy. Andy Hardy's.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, and the whole thing is in the context of advice to his son,
Yeah.
who has apparently by then been sufficiently beaten.
Oh, and he picks on the girls again.
Oh, over and over again.
22.
Where are you?
22. Chapter 22.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
3. 22, 3. And 4.
Uh-huh.
And 5.
Yes. There's some more. You've got a lot of it. Um, 21. This man will be punished by the streets of the city, and where he least suspects it, he will be seized. So it is with a woman who leaves her husband and presents him with an heir by another man. But first of all, she has disobeyed the law of the Most High, one of the very few references to the law in the book. Second, she has committed an offense against her husband. So both God and her husband should have a chance. And third, through her fornication, she has committed adultery and brought forth children by another man. She herself will be brought before the assembly, and her punishment will extend to her children.
Oh.
Um, 25:13. You like this? Any wound but not a wound of the heart, and wickedness but not the wickedness of a woman. Any suffering but not suffering from those who hate, and any vengeance but not the vengeance of enemies. There is no venom worse than a snake's venom, and no anger worse than a woman's wrath. I would rather live with a lion and a dragon than live with an evil woman. A woman's wickedness changes her appearance, darkens her face like that of a bear. Her husband sits among the neighbors, and he cannot help sighing bitterly. Like the corner bar. Any iniquity is small compared to a woman's iniquity. May a sinner's lot befall her. A sandy ascent for the feet of the aged, such is a garrulous wife to a quiet husband. Wrath and impudence and great disgrace when a wife supports her husband. Dejected mind, gloomy face, wounded heart comes from an evil wife. Drooping hands, weak knees come from the wife who does not make her husband happy. From a woman, sin has its beginning. This is Eve. From a woman, sin had its beginning, and because of her, we all die.
That's her fault.
So you can see by now that Genesis text is interpreted that way. Allow no outlet to water, and no boldness or speech to an evil wife. If she does not go as you direct, separate her from yourself. On the other hand, 26:30, a good wife is a great blessing. She will be granted among the blessings of the man who fears the Lord. Then we get back to the bad wife again. A bad wife is a chafing yoke. A drunken wife arouses great anger. Her haughty stare betrays an unchaste wife, etc.
Keep a strict watch over an unruly wife, lest finding an opportunity, she make use of it.
I mean, there's so much bumper sticker material.
Too bad they didn't have bumpers. No bumpers on their chariots.
So man was without any fault.
So, well, what do you think? Is the wisdom of Sirach wisdom? Some of it certainly is.
So it's common sense.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also, deep cultural bias.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But I mean, the self-discipline thing and all, and the, enjoy it but don't overdo it. I mean, this is a kind of common sense, sound thinking.
The comments about the dangers of women who aren't
The W word, yeah.
that's sort of a testament to how powerful women can be.
Oh, yeah.
And I frequently remind
They're
people
scared,
that
yeah.
it took the devil himself to fool Eve, but it only took a woman to fool Adam.
Okay. There's a lot to learn from this book, but
He who betrays a secret cannot be trusted. Well, that's true.
yep. That's a big thing here, the secret keeping. And that's part of the basis for choose your friends few and carefully.
Yeah.
You want people you can confide in, and they won't gossip.
And the deal about be careful who you invited to your house.
Yes.
It made me think of those 4 people who were murdered out in Metairie yesterday.
Yeah.
I wonder if they invited
I
somebody
think it
in.
went in through
you
a
know.
door that was
Is that what happened? 38:16. My child, let your tears fall for the dead. Now this is someone in the family who has died. And here too you find a kind of a, don't get too excited. And as one in great pain begin the lament. As one in great pain begin the lament. Lay out the body with due ceremony, do it right. Do not neglect the burial. Let your weeping be bitter and your wailing fervent. Make your mourning worthy of the departed for one day or two. So it's a show, really. I mean, it's sort of the decent thing. For one day or two, to avoid criticism. So it's pretty candid in that respect. Then be comforted for your grief.
Well, mine says, then compose yourself after your grief. So a couple of days and then
Relax.
get on with it.
I'm curious, in those years, they will behave like this, or they pretend they were okay about death. Couple of days mourning, and after that,
Yeah.
they took it easier, maybe.
Move on, yeah. Right.
Or maybe they were.
And mourning was a big thing in many of in much of Jewish culture, prolonged mourning. Probably. 44 is the beginning of that. Let us now sing the praises of famous men, and you can sing them on your own.